Hi, I'm Sonya, and I'm here today with Sid and Shaki from Polybase. I work at Hedgehog, and we wanted to get to know Polybase, the story of how the project originated, and the problems that you guys are trying to solve. So I think I'll throw it over to you guys right away. Maybe you can give us your elevator pitch to get people started.
Yeah, definitely. I'll give you the elevator pitch and I'll give you a little bit of a background and story into how we got started. Polybase is the database for Web3. There's a lot to unpack there. So basically, there's developers building decentralized applications, and they face this kind of key trade-off, which is that the more you increase decentralization, kind of the worse the user experience gets and the more expensive it gets to build these apps because now you're trying to build on top of Ethereum instead of other smaller networks, things like that. And so from a structured data perspective, a lot of developers just opt to store their data in traditional databases like Postgres, MongoDB, or Firebase. And so they're kind of basically choosing UX over decentralization. Now, what Polybase does is actually solve this trade-off. And so developers no longer have to choose between better UX and cost versus decentralization. They can get both. And they can build applications that have really good user experience, but are also cost-effective and decentralized. And the key kind of insight and breakthrough here, and the reason we're able to do this is because of a new cryptography primitive called zero-knowledge proofs. And so that's at the core of Polybase, our ZK proofs. And the way we use them is by storing data off-chain and then generating zero-knowledge proofs of that data and of the permissions of that data, and then posting those proofs on-chain to L1s. So in that way, you inherit the security and decentralization of L1s, but you also get the better UX and cost effectiveness of storing data off-chain.
So how did you guys run into this problem and, realize that this is what you wanted to work on?
Yeah, so before we even wrote the first line of code, we ended up talking to 50 to 60 Web3 developers. And these were kind of like hour-long casual conversations that we had with people across the industry. So developers building DeFi, DAO tooling, creator platforms, and kind of we found this common thread amongst all of them, which was they were using smart contracts for their tokens, for payments. They were using IPFS, Filecoin, Arweave for their file storage. And then they were using centralized databases for their structured data storage. And that was kind of like a yellow flag to us, like, why is this happening? And so as we researched deeper, we found that there was no good option for developers to store this structured data in a decentralized way. And that really kind of was the genesis of this idea. And based on a lot of the feedback we got from developers we talked to, we kind of designed the feature set in this way that's like a drop-in replacement for existing databases. So if you're using Firebase already, the API for Polybase is almost exactly the same. Concepts are very similar. So there's no learning curve at all, and it's kind of a drop-in replacement.
And on the technical side, was there like a particular light bulb moment when you realized that ZK proofs were going to, be the key?
Yeah, so, as we were talking to developers, we encountered this trade-off that I mentioned before as well between UX and cost versus decentralization. And as we researched, there was kind of new papers coming out on zero-knowledge proofs. And Callum, my co-founder and CTO of Polybase, was the one that kind of put two and two together and was able to create the architecture that allows Polybase to work. And that's when we wrote our white paper that would then kind of circulated to those developers, to other stakeholders, and eventually served as a basis for us raising our seed round.
And how about how the team came together? Like, how did you and your co-founder find each other and start, getting Polybase started?
Yeah, so Callum and I met sometime in 2019, 2020. He was at Y Combinator. He was in the cohort building a data analytics company. And he was doing some crazy stuff around like different query engines that he was building himself. I was actually a user of the product he was building. It was kind of like a dashboarding tool.
Nice.
And he reached out to me as a user for feedback. And that was the first time we chatted. Found out that he was in Mountain View, I was in San Jose, both very close to each other in the Bay Area. And we ended up meeting in person. We basically immediately knew we wanted to work with each other at some point. And then earlier this year, the timing was right for both of us when I left my last job. And then so we started Polybase together.
What about your crypto or like Web3 origin story? How did you get interested in this space?
Yeah, of course, we always have that story. So I think it was 2012. I was in college, didn't have too much money, but heard about Bitcoin, super cool, interesting new cryptocurrency. It was just in a couple forums. I told my friends about it. They were like, this is this is a scam. Like you have to know that, right?
It's
And
not
I was
backed
like,
by
no, no.
anything.
Yeah, and I was like, no, 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 you just like send a MoneyGram to someone and they'll like put Bitcoin in this account for you. That's how you bought Bitcoin back then. And they're like, yeah, good luck, man. So I remember you had to like fill out this form for like a MoneyGram and take it to like Walgreens or something. I had everything filled out and I had a $20 bill. And my friends were like, "Hey, you want to go get some Taco Bell?" And I was like, "Yeah, like let's go get some food." I ended up spending that $20 at Taco Bell, most expensive burrito I ever bought.
Oh, and it was a Taco Bell burrito too. So you
Yeah,
win some, you lose some, huh? Um,
exactly.
then did you like continue to sort of keep tabs on how things were developing?
Yeah, so I would say I've always been super interested in some of the foundational technology around, cryptocurrencies and Web3. And so that includes the distributed ledger that Bitcoin kind of initially created, the distributed virtual machine that Ethereum then created after that. I've been kind of following along, read both of those white papers as soon as I found out about them. Um, and then kind of just paid attention to what was going on, but didn't fully enter and build anything in the space until earlier this year. And so I really felt this kind of culmination of all my experience in the data analytics, data infrastructure, and developer tooling space that I've been in for a while. And all of that kind of coming to this inflection point with Web3 starting to enter the mainstream developer ecosystem. And I think that's like the perfect time for us to come together and build what we're building at Polybase.
It sounds like the first phase when you were kind of figuring out what your product was going to look like, you were going around and talking to a bunch of people who are, working on building Web3 things broadly. Were there particular themes that jumped out at you in that conversation about, I don't know, the trajectory of the space?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we saw a lot of people building things in DeFi, but that like had started to kind of cool down in the sense that like all of the derivative protocols and investment lending protocols, they had already kind of been built in many ways. I think people were building like now derivatives of derivatives and like really kind of more esoteric stuff. And then people were kind of rebuilding stuff they saw on one chain into another chain. And so I think a lot of people started thinking about, okay, what's next? And DAOs became, I think, a much bigger topic of conversation in a lot of these discussions. And specifically, not just, hey, let's form a DAO, but like, what are the tools that DAOs need? And the real question we're asking there, like, what are the tools that are going to enable future human collaboration at a much bigger and more efficient scale than we have today? Because like the organizational structure of traditional corporations today, we can see in many ways has been breaking down over the last 10 years. And a lot of the problems we see out in industry is because of these structures. They're just not conducive to kind of the decision making that needs to happen when you have something like Twitter that's like running the news of the world, right? And so like the person at the top and the person at the bottom of this very large corporation need to be able to have a more equal say. It can't be absolutely equal, obviously, I understand that, but more of an equal say. And I think that kind of idea is what I saw a lot of people thinking about. And so decentralized collaboration was a big theme. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask if you've gotten involved in any DAOs yourself.
Yeah, so what the first DAO I joined was FWB DAO, and so that's I think it is the biggest social DAO in the space. It's been around for a long time. I really enjoyed it because they have events all the time here in New York and across the world, I think now, and it's a really good community of like artists, builders, technologists, finance people. So good mix there. I'm also a part of Empire DAO. And so that
I
is
haven't
a
heard of that one.
yeah, Empire DAO is a Web3 co-working space here in Manhattan and Soho. And so I work out of there. Really, really good space to work. A lot of good builders that show up there. I've met a lot of good colleagues and friends now from that. And then the last one recently I became a part of was Orange DAO, which is the investment DAO. They participated in our round. They're an investor now, so we're part of that DAO.
The CTO of Hedgehog, Colton, is also part of Orange DAO because we're also a YC company. So
Nice. Yeah,
I
I think
got
I
that
saw that.
connection. Yeah. I wanted to ask, sort of backing up and going back to Polybase itself, as opposed to kind of the broader crypto world. Can you walk me through like a Polybase use case or like what it would look like in action?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we kind of have a bunch of different use cases. I'll kind of start with the first one we talk about, which is social and chat. Um, I think the big thing in the news is Twitter, right? And so if you think about like a lot of people's responses to a lot of the problems that Twitter has is, oh, okay, it should be decentralized, right? It's easy to say, very, very hard to implement. There's a lot of cultural issues, but I'll talk about the technical ones. So technically, if you tried to put Twitter on chain, it would be prohibitively expensive. I'm talking about it would cost trillions of dollars to run if it was on a chain like Ethereum. Even if it was on a chain like Polygon or Solana that are a little bit cheaper, it would still cost hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. And I might be a couple magnitudes lower actually than it actually is. And the reasoning behind this is that blockchains weren't meant to store structured data at scale. They're meant to store financial ledgers, and then Ethereum kind of expanded that to store computer variables or state of a particular program. But when we look at Web 2, you have these databases with hundreds of thousands, millions of rows. All the tweets are theoretically in like one database. That's not technically correct, but they are in a database that you can search and query and look up. That infrastructure doesn't exist in Web 2 yet. That's what Polybase is building. So to kind of answer your question, if you wanted to build a truly decentralized Twitter and store that data in a way that was censorship resistant, in a way that it was self-sovereign data, so users had control over their data to be able to delete it and access it whenever they wanted, that would have to be built on a system similar to Polybase. And that's kind of a main use case of ours. On the other hand, I mentioned DAO tooling. And so DAOs are sitting at a very interesting intersection of like on-chain and off-chain data. And so on-chain, you might have like the token payments for DAOs, you might have specific contracts set up that are transferring value between different people or different companies. And then like you have this aspect of off-chain data, which might be like votes, it might be proposals, it might be a list of customers in a CRM tool. Now, to blend these two together, you need quite a sophisticated setup to be able to read data from off-chain sources into on-chain sources and then validate and verify that that data is correct. So we have oracles today that allow you to pull in data off-chain into smart contracts, but we've seen tons of hacks around them because that data is not validated. It just gets pushed in. So, people can manipulate the price of certain assets, and then on chain, they'll show up differently and allow people to borrow or lend and do kind of crazy things based on the wrong data. And so what Polybase allows you to do is to have kind of a buffer of data that before it gets put into a smart contract, that data can come into Polybase and then it can go through a review process. So that might be a 12-hour, 24-hour review process. And only if people approve that this data is correct, then it goes on chain. Now, these are things that you can build into Polybase that are trustless in the sense that they can't be manipulated. They're set in the rules of the contract of the database table. And so everyone that is reading that data can trust that that data was originated in the right way. So that's just two examples. There's tons more that I can go to, but just for the sake of time, I'll stop with those two.
I have a follow-up question, which I'm hoping you can explain a little bit more how the off-chain part of Polybase hooks up to the on-chain part, which I think you were touching on there, but maybe you can explain it a little further.
Yeah, so when you have, let's say, off-chain data on, let's take an example of one of our customers. They're building a CRM tool for Web3. Now, the CRM tool is supposed to allow, let's say, hundreds or thousands of people to collaborate on a sales process or on an investment process for a project. And you can imagine there's like the rows represent different projects and the columns represent potential stages that project is going through or other metadata on that project. So when you have something like this, that all stays off-chain in the Polybase indexer, which is a node on the Polybase network, similar to Filecoin, where you have different service providers actually storing your data. Now, what happens is every time you write data into the Polybase database, we create a zero-knowledge proof that that data was written in the right way, respecting the permissions of that database. Now, this proof then gets written on-chain, and then the data, off-chain data, actually gets rolled up into a Merkle tree, which is kind of a hash of hashes of that data, and then a hash gets written on-chain as well. So now what you have is you have off-chain data, but you have on-chain proof that the data was written correctly, and then you have a final kind of rolled up hash of this on-chain, off-chain data. Now, what that allows you to do is from a smart contract, you can query that off-chain data, and then you can validate that the data you received back is correct by reading the on-chain proofs and content hashes. And so that kind of end-to-end validation of querying large amounts of data and then being able to prove that this data is actually the data that you wanted and it hasn't been tampered with and it has been written with the right permissions. That's kind of the interaction of the on-chain, off-chain components.
So something I wanted to ask about in general is what are some of the obstacles that you've encountered while building Polybase, and I don't know, anything that you've found an interesting solution to, aside from the sort of broader, this is a solution to a problem?
Yeah, I think, a lot of the focus for the past, I would say 5, 6, 7 years has been on DeFi and has been on this idea of like reading data from off-chain into dApps. And so like you guys probably use something like the Graph or Covalent, these technologies. When we were originally starting and pitching Polybase, a lot of one of the challenges we ran into is everyone kept thinking we were indexing on-chain data and making it available in kind of this quick indexed and queryable way. That's not what we're doing. And so it took a little bit of time for us to explain to people this whole vertical of Web3 infrastructure that we're building out, where it's a general purpose database. So you can store whatever application data you want, maybe a user profile, like I mentioned, tweets, things like that. It's not meant for querying on-chain data. And so that's kind of like one confusion that people had initially.
You just re-sparked what I wanted to ask that I lost the thread of, which is Polybase L1 agnostic, or is it set up for like particular chains?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is chain agnostic. Now, when I described how we're writing our zero-knowledge proofs and content hashes on chain, we basically we're going to be building a bridge between Polybase and various L1s and L2s. And so we're starting with EVM-based chains first, and then we have partnerships that we're building with a couple other ecosystems as well. I can't say the names yet. We're just signing a couple of the partnerships. I'm super excited to talk about it once that's public, but yeah, more to come on that. But it is chain agnostic, and we'll be partnering with ecosystems to make a bridge available.
So how many people is Polybase right now? I imagine, scrappy startup phase, but are you a distributed company? Are you all in New York? What's your setup?
Yeah, so we're fully distributed based off between essentially New York and various parts of Europe. And so we're quite a small team right now. We're 5 people. We are planning on staying about this size until next year, but we will definitely start to hire next year as well.
Just throwing out a fun one. Any thoughts on the recent turmoil in the whole crypto world?
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna trust somebody with your money, that trust can be broken. So I think that's my
Always invest
It almost
money, you
feels
can
like
lose.
an understatement.
with that, I don't know what else to say about that hasn't already been tweeted about, but it's just something that we all need to understand is like, look, in Web2 and in the real world, we use trust a lot. We put our money in banks. We, trust the government to do certain things with, the services that they provide us, things like that. A lot of that is still existing in Web3. And I think there is this idea that like Web3 needs to be fully trustless. I think some parts of it definitely do. But a lot of it is still going to be at the intersection of the general population and new technology. And it's going to take a while to get to a trustless future. And that's something, honestly, that we want to accelerate at Polybase. And we feel that a lot of people are still using centralized services, still trusting, certain companies. And I think we need to accelerate the path towards, more decentralized services. I think DeFi has like done that in many ways, but obviously not enough. So.
Well, that does tie back into your whole data validation paradigm, like the don't just trust, but also verify.
Absolutely. I think that is becoming a bigger and bigger rallying cry. Don't trust, verify. And I think like a lot of that's like a UX problem. When you go to when you go view an NFT or you go view a particular like protocol on DeFi, sometimes it's really hard to dig into the actual proof that something is trustless and decentralized. And you can't ask everyone to go and read the smart contract.
Yeah. If you're a normal person trying to like decode an Etherscan result is non-trivial, let's say.
No, and I think like that's a big area where I think we need a lot more innovation there, is just like the accessibility of the proof of decentralization. So I think I'm excited to see kind of what people build around that. Maybe it's like making easier to read smart contract languages, kind of like no code tools around. I'm super excited to see stuff like that being built.
Well, we're coming up on half an hour. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you want to make sure gets said, or, anything that's still lingering on the tip of your tongue?
No, I think we covered a lot. Like, I think, I'm excited there's a couple announcements that are coming, from Polybase. Those will probably come in the next month, probably in January. But I think
everybody follow. What is it? Polybase HQ? Is that your Twitter handle?
It's Polybase_XYZ.
Ah, okay. Well, I don't know where I got HQ from.
I think. Do you guys use HQ?
We just have we have .app at the end.
Okay.
Yeah. Everyone has to figure out their own little like.
Yeah. HQ is a little web too. Not gonna lie.
True. We don't have HQs anymore in this world.
No.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, it's a pleasure to chat with you guys. And
Awesome.
I feel like I understand Polybase way better than I did based on trying to, you have a lot of great material on your website, but I feel like it was a little bit over my head in terms of the level of technicality. So this is a good, human language. Not saying that devs aren't human. Sometimes I have my doubts, but no.
Yeah, it's one of the difficulties. It's you have to phrase the same thing and for multiple people, right? I think that's the challenge of marketing at its core.
That's what I'm here for, Sonya.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I had one question for you. So
Oh, go for it.
So when I looked at the marketing content for Hedgehog and Polybase, I guess we have one similarity, right? Both of us are trying to tell a story right? We're not selling at all. We're trying to tell a story, right? So like me and Sid, we both handle the marketing for Polybase, right? Entirely. So when we were putting the framework, there was no single framework for Web3 proven yet, right? We're all figuring it out. So I would love to, know what's the strategy that you use for content marketing. Obviously, you do a lot of blogs, you do a lot of newsletters. So I'd love to understand how you go with content and what are the tools that you use,
We've definitely leaned on the long form content more, as you notice. It's so hard when you don't have much of a budget to get traction on social media, especially some of the other. Twitter has more potential, I think, than like, say, trying to grow a Facebook page when you're not going to spend any money on it is pretty brutal. It's not completely impossible, but you guys also deal with the constraints of a small team. So you know how that is. Like, you can only be in so many places, especially if you want to like have a pretty high quality level. It's hard to spread yourself thin and keep the quality high. So, I think the newsletter has really been one of our most successful things. We send it out to everyone who has signed up for a Hedgehog account who hasn't unsubscribed from the newsletter, which is still a fairly large number of people. Most people haven't unsubscribed. And we have a decent open rate. It's around 20%. It fluctuates a little bit. Yeah, well, for like finance, marketing type stuff, we do like a news roundup. It's written in the voice of the CEO. And that's been our like keeping engagement, especially while we're working on, getting the product to the next level. So it's been somewhat stagnant for a while. This is kind of how we keep ourselves in people's mind space. Like, please remember that we exist. Yeah. We were doing more paid advertising for user acquisition, but that got slowed down both because we wanted to sort of conserve budget for when we have something new to offer, when we are really able to our current product is not revenue generating. So it's like, we want to kind of save the spend for when we can ship that, which like I said, hopefully in the new year, you never know with building software. Exactly. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that part of things. Where was I going with that? The paid advertising was fairly effective for getting users. So hopefully we'll be able to kind of turn that back on when we have something more to offer people. But that's where most of our initial user base came from. And now we're just kind of trying to keep them in relationship with us until we have something more to offer. I was really impressed with your approach to Twitter, and that definitely made me feel like, oh, this is a quality company. And it's just, it makes you feel good to be featured, right? It's like, oh, this is a nice thread about us. So it's a good approach. And, we followed you guys based on that. So, yeah.
So the initial 1 month we tried putting a lot of content, quantity over quality. We were going all in, and then we took a break and we decided, no, we're not going to sell Polybase from now on. We're just going to tell other project story and our story. That's it. That's the content pillars. So,
definitely the narrative approach, I think, works really well. And people especially if you can which is something I noticed that you guys were doing on your website also, is like pulling back the curtain a little bit. Like, here's our building process. Like you mentioned that you had filmed some internal meetings to make them into content. People seem to really respond to that kind of thing. It's like as a startup, you're kind of an underdog, right? So exactly, definitely leaning into that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.